The forest was still that morning. Not silent, but settled. The kind of quiet that settles into valleys before the sun fully reaches the ground. In the field journals of the Northern Continental Survey, dated June of 1881, one entry is marked with an unusual margin note written in a tighter hand than the rest. Air calm. Woods unsettled. No further explanation was given on that page. Only later entries suggest why the remark was made at all. The survey camp stood along a shallow tributary of the upper Red River Basin, several miles from the nearest rail stop. The region, recently opened for formal mapping and timber assessment, was still sparsely traveled. The party consisted of 8 men, 2 senior surveyors, a cartographer, 3 chain carriers, a cook, and a young assistant assigned to record measurements and weather conditions, mark elevation points, record soil and timber densities, remain in the area for 3 weeks before moving east. By all outward accounts, the first days passed without incident. Camp was arranged on a low rise above the waterline. Canvas tents were anchored between cedar trunks. Equipment was stacked carefully beneath oilcloth. Meals were taken at dawn, and again just before dusk. The journals describe heat, insects, and the persistent dampness of the ground, but nothing beyond the ordinary discomforts of fieldwork. Yet small irregularities appear in the margins of their notes. On June 14th, Assistant Recorder Thomas H. Wilcott wrote of difficulty aligning the transit compass near the western tree line. The needle, he claimed, hesitated before settling, though no metallic objects were nearby. The senior surveyor dismissed the matter as instrument fatigue. It was adjusted, recalibrated, and used without further comment. 2 days later, Cook Samuel Brayer mentioned in a personal letter that smoke from the morning fire did not drift as expected. It rose in thin columns, then bent sharply downward, clinging close to the ground despite the absence of wind. He described it as falling smoke, a phrase not commonly used in the camp's other correspondence. By the 3rd week of June, several men noted an unusual heaviness in the air during the early mornings. Not humidity alone. Something slower. Pressing. Wilcott recorded that sound carried strangely at dawn. Footsteps sounded closer than they were. Voices echoed faintly between trees, even when spoken at normal volume. Still, no one spoke openly of concern. Survey work continued. Stakes were driven. Bearings were recorded. The camp remained orderly, disciplined, and outwardly calm. Then came the first observation that would later be referenced in regional newspapers under vague headlines. Not dramatic, not violent, simply strange. On the morning of June 21st, as the men prepared to depart for the eastern grid line, chain carrier Robert Elkins paused near the tree boundary and remarked that the trunks ahead appeared unsteady. Another man laughed, suggesting heat shimmer or fatigue. But Wilcott, standing several yards behind, wrote later that he saw it as well. Not falling, not bending under wind, but shifting. Slight, deliberate motion in the upper limbs. Leaves moving without sound. Branches swaying while grass at their base remained completely still. No wind was recorded that morning. The anemometer, kept near the supply tent, showed no measurable air movement. The men did not approach the trees immediately. They stood for several moments, watching, waiting for a breeze that never arrived. Eventually, work resumed. The incident was not discussed again that day. But from that point forward, the journals begin to change in tone. Entries become shorter. Observations grow more careful. Descriptions more restrained. Something had been noticed, and though no one yet understood its meaning, the camp no longer felt as settled as it once had. The forest, according to their own words, had begun to behave differently, and they were not certain why. The following morning did not bring immediate confirmation of what had been seen. Instead, it brought doubt. June 22nd opened with clear skies and mild temperature. The forest stood upright and still, showing no outward irregularities. Several men privately dismissed the previous day's observation as fatigue or optical strain. Long hours beneath the sun often produced distortions. This explanation was accepted without further debate, and the eastern grid assignment proceeded as scheduled. Yet before midday, the calm was interrupted. At approximately 10 minutes past 11, while 3 chain carriers worked along the tree margin, A sound was reported from deeper within the forest. Not the crack of falling timber. Not the movement of animals. According to Wilcott's journal, it resembled the dragging of heavy cloth against bark, slow and uneven. The sound lasted no more than 15 seconds and then stopped abruptly. The men paused, they listened. Nothing followed. Assuming wildlife, Elkins advanced several paces toward the sound's origin. He reported no tracks, broken undergrowth, or displaced brush. The ground was dry enough to hold clear impressions. There were none. Work resumed once more. It was not until early afternoon that the first visual disturbance occurred. While positioning the transit instrument near a marked stake, surveyor Charles H. Warren noticed movement along the southern tree line. He initially believed it to be shifting sunlight, shadows playing across the trunks. But when the light pattern remained constant and the motion continued, he called the others over. This time, several men observed it together. 3 large trees, estimated at over 60 feet in height, showed slow lateral motion in their upper sections. The movement was subtle, measured in inches rather than feet. The trunks themselves did not bend sharply. Instead, the canopy seemed to shift as a whole, drifting to the right and returning to its original position. No leaves fell. No branches cracked. The surrounding brush remained motionless. Breyer later wrote that it reminded him of something heavy settling into place, then adjusting again. The men checked the air. They threw handfuls of dust upward. It fell straight down. The camp flag, tied loosely to a supply pole, hung limp. The explanation of wind could no longer be comfortably used. Warren ordered a brief halt to the survey line and recorded the occurrence in the official log. His language was careful. He did not describe the trees as moving on their own. Instead, he wrote of localized canopy displacement without apparent atmospheric cause. Despite the formal phrasing, unease settled across the group. Conversation became quieter. Movements were more deliberate. Several men avoided working near the forest edge for the remainder of the afternoon, choosing instead to complete interior measurements closer to camp. That evening, the cook reported difficulty starting the fire. The flame, once lit, leaned sharply inward toward the forest, though no breeze could be felt. Smoke again pressed low against the ground before dispersing slowly between the trunks. After supper, the men gathered near the lanterns. No official meeting was called, but the subject surfaced regardless. Possible explanations were offered. Underground settling, distant logging vibrations, temperature layers within the canopy. Each suggestion sounded reasonable when spoken aloud, yet none fully accounted for what had been observed. Before turning in, Wilcott made one final note that night. He wrote that, as darkness settled, the forest produced fewer insect sounds than expected. Crickets diminished. Nightbirds remained absent. The woods beyond the lantern glow appeared unnaturally still, as though listening. Nothing more occurred before sleep, but for the first time since arriving, several men recorded difficulty resting. They woke repeatedly. Not from noise, not from dreams, from the sense that something nearby had not yet finished moving. By the 4th morning, after the initial observation, the disturbances no longer appeared isolated. These were thin trees, no thicker than a man's wrist. They did not sway individually. Several men reported waking to the sensation of pressure in the ears, similar to changes in elevation. Others described a faint vibration through the ground, too weak to be felt through the feet, but noticeable when lying still. No one left the camp. No one suggested abandoning the assignment. But by morning, it was clear that what had begun as an isolated curiosity was becoming a pattern, and the forest was no longer remaining at a distance. June 27th is the final date on which the camp's records maintained regular structure. What occurred that morning disrupted not only the survey schedule, but the discipline with which the men had approached every prior disturbance. The day began without fog. The sky was pale and clear, air temperature moderate, no wind recorded. The camp rose earlier than usual, driven less by routine and more by restless sleep. Several men remarked that the forest appeared unusually dark along its lower edge, as though shadow had gathered beneath the canopy despite the rising sun. By mid-morning, Warren ordered a short measurement run west of camp, an area previously avoided due to repeated movement reports. The task was meant to be brief. 2 stakes. 1. Elevation reading. No extended work. 5 men proceeded together. They had advanced less than 300 yards when the first major disturbance occurred. Without warning, a wide section of trees directly ahead exhibited movement at multiple heights. Upper branches shifted laterally. Mid-level limbs adjusted in uneven patterns. The motion was no longer isolated to a single cluster. It extended across a visible band of forest nearly 40 yards wide. This time, sound accompanied it. Not a crash, not breaking wood, but a low, continuous creaking, similar to the slow stress of timber under weight. The men stopped immediately. According to Wilcott's account, the ground beneath their feet felt unsettled, but not shaking, a sensation he compared to standing on packed earth during distant thunder. Then came the moment that ended further speculation. One of the marked trees at the edge of the movement zone changed position. It did not fall. It did not uproot. Instead, the trunk shifted several inches sideways at its base, enough to visibly alter the stake alignment previously recorded. The bark showed no tearing. The soil did not open. Yet the position was unmistakably different. Warren ordered a retreat. The men withdrew slowly, maintaining visual contact with the area. The movement continued for nearly a minute after they backed away, then gradually ceased. When it ended, the forest returned to stillness. No further motion followed. No wind arrived. The silence afterward was described by multiple members as heavier than the event itself. Back at camp, the mood changed entirely. Work was suspended. Equipment was left in place. The men gathered in the central clearing and reviewed what had been observed. For the first time, fear was openly acknowledged. Not panic, not shouting, but the quiet recognition that the phenomenon could no longer be dismissed as environmental irregularity alone. Breyer suggested immediate departure. Elkins argued for waiting until morning, concerned about traveling through the forest after dark. Warren hesitated. The official assignment still stood. Abandoning the survey without clear danger carried consequences. Yet the displacement of a marked tree could not be ignored. While the discussion continued, another disturbance occurred. This one was closer than any before. From the southern boundary of camp, a slow movement passed through the lower branches, not across the canopy, not deep within the woods, but along the immediate edge of their clearing. The tents remained still. The supply poles did not move, only the trees. Several men stepped backward instinctively. No order was given, no command was needed. Camp members began quietly gathering essential equipment, not hurried, not chaotic, but deliberate, as though all had reached the same unspoken decision. That evening, no fire was lit. Lanterns were kept low. The men sat in near silence, listening to the forest beyond the clearing. No further movement occurred that night, but no one slept. They waited, and in that waiting, the sense of being observed by something without form or sound settled over the camp. The survey, though not yet officially abandoned, had reached its breaking point. The decision to leave was not recorded as an order. It appeared instead as a gradual unraveling of routine. At first light on June 28th, the camp rose without the usual signals. No cooking fire, no shouted instructions, Men moved quietly between tents, gathering instruments, folding canvas, bundling provisions. The journals described this morning in brief, efficient phrases, as though no one wished to linger on the details. Warren finally marked the survey as temporarily suspended due to environmental instability. The language was cautious, official. It avoided implication, yet the meaning was clear. They would not continue. Departure preparations were complicated by hesitation. Several men expressed concern that movement might resume during transit. The forest path leading back toward the rail junction passed directly through areas where disturbances had been observed. Alternate routes were discussed, but rejected due to rough terrain and poor mapping. By mid-morning, the group assembled at the clearing's edge. Before stepping into the tree line, Wilcott recorded one final observation. He noted that the forest appeared unchanged in appearance. No broken limbs, no displaced soil, no visible sign that anything unusual had occurred. The quiet normality of the scene unsettled him more than the movement itself. It suggested that whatever had taken place left no lasting trace. The men departed in single file. Progress was slow. Every sound prompted brief halts. Equipment was carried tighter to the body. No conversation occurred beyond necessary direction. According to Elkin's later account, several men reported the sensation of pressure returning in their ears as they moved deeper into the forest. Though no elevation change was present, roughly 2 miles from camp, the final disturbance was reported. This time, it occurred behind them. A section of trees near their former campsite shifted briefly, visible through gaps in the trail. Only the upper branches were seen moving. No sound carried the distance. The men did not stop to observe. They increased their pace without running. By late afternoon, the group reached open terrain near the river bend, beyond the densest forest boundary. Only then did the tension visibly lessen. Several men sat down without speaking. Breyer later wrote that the open sky felt unnaturally wide, as though emerging from a confined space. That night, they camped in the open, away from tree cover. A fire was lit for the first time in 2 days. It burned normally. Smoke rose straight upward. No one commented on it aloud, but the journals record quiet relief. In the days that followed, the immediate effects became apparent. Sleep disturbances continued. 2 men reported recurring dreams of movement without sound. Wilcott complained of persistent headaches and pressure sensations lasting nearly a week. Warren submitted a formal report to the regional survey office, omitting emotional language but clearly stating that the site was unsuitable for continued operations. The recommendation was accepted without public explanation. No return expedition was scheduled that season. Within weeks, the story reached nearby settlements in fragmented form. Lumber workers spoke of shifting woods. Traders repeated rumors of unstable ground. Local papers printed brief mentions of delayed surveys due to unusual forest conditions, offering no further detail. The men themselves avoided extended discussion. Some refused interviews altogether. Others provided restrained accounts that focused on procedure rather than sensation. What united them was silence regarding interpretation. They described what happened. They did not explain it. And as time passed, the campsite faded from official records, becoming another unmarked point on unfinished maps. Yet among those who were present, the memory remained precise. Not of danger, not of visible threat, but of something that had occurred without warning, without voice, and without leaving evidence behind. In the months following the withdrawal, the incident did not disappear entirely. It diminished. The official report filed by Warren was archived under routine survey delays. No special inquiry was opened. No geological team was dispatched. The explanation offered internally referred only to localized environmental irregularity, a phrase broad enough to contain uncertainty without naming it. Wilcott's personal journal, however, remained more detailed. In later entries written from his home station, he returned repeatedly to the memory of the forest's movement. His language became quieter over time, less descriptive, more reflective. He questioned whether distance had altered perception, whether stress had influenced judgment. Yet he never denied what he had seen. In one passage, dated November of 1881, he wrote, "If the ground had broken, we would have understood it. If the trees had fallen, we could have named it. But what unsettled us most was that nothing appeared damaged. It was as though the land itself chose to adjust, and then refused to explain why. Other members of the camp left fewer records. Breyer mentioned the incident only once more, in a letter to his brother, describing it as a place I would not cook in again. Elkins declined to speak publicly when approached years later by a regional paper compiling frontier accounts. Warren never addressed the matter outside of professional correspondence. As time passed, the site itself faded from practical memory. No permanent marker was placed. The incomplete grid lines were absorbed into later mapping efforts without reference to their origin. Lumber crews eventually worked nearby, though not directly on the original camp location. No similar reports were officially recorded. If unusual movement occurred again, it did not enter formal documentation. What remains today are fragments, a margin note about unsettled woods, a compass hesitation, smoke that would not rise, trees that shifted without wind. None of these alone would merit attention. Together, they form a narrow window into a moment that did not repeat itself in the same way. There was no final explanation, no concluding event, no definitive record of cause. Only a brief period in the summer of 1881 when experienced surveyors, trained to measure land with precision, encountered something that could not be easily measured at all. The forest returned to stillness. The camp disappeared, and the men carried the memory quietly into the rest of their lives. Not as a story of terror, but as an unresolved observation, one that remained, like the movement itself, subtle, restrained, and unanswered.